Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski. We're back in part 3 of 4, talking the times, events, people, and history in Creigh Kelley's life.
I was having so much fun. And had it not been for the tragedy of the earthquake in Mexico City, we were scheduled to do 3 or 4 other races. We did eventually put on a race in Cancun. And much later, I got involved with Leukemia and Lymphoma Society at that time, the Leukemia Society, helping them and be on the local board for the Rocky Mountain region in the 90s and a coach also for their athletes. In 90s, a buddy of mine said, let's put on a race in Cozumel. I said, where's Cozumel? It's at a little island off Cancun. I said, we can do that. So I spent at least a month for the next 4 years in Mexico, certifying courses and putting on races, meeting with the government, and put on a triathlon there before triathlons were big in Mexico. I got to do so many things just by circumstance. We tried to blend all these things together. It took its toll. In 85, I got divorced from my first wife. She should have divorced me earlier than that just because I was never home. I was always traveling. I was living the life of Riley, and we had 3 children. It was very one-sided. I had to learn that the hard way. We are still great friends right now. So that's awesome. The point is, it was all uncharted territory. A guy named Joe Arzola, now gone, great photographer, but also a great coach, lived here in Colorado in Denver, came to me and said, I want you to be involved with the Denver Track Club. You can be on their competitive team, which I was the least of the competitors. You could help us promote the Denver Track Club because they saw me as a means to an end, not as a great athlete. I was just adequate athlete. He said, and I want you to go to the Athletics Congress annual convention. You can be there as our representative for distance running. And I went, I don't even understand what this is all about. But I went to Atlanta and I met Olin Castle. Olin was the head of the Athletics Congress, now USA Track and Field. And I went to these meetings, and in the back of the room of the long distance running committee, it was about 100 people in there. They were smoking. These old officials were smoking in the back of the room. I thought that was disgusting. I'm listening to these old guys now, much younger than I am, speaking and talking about sport. I said, these aren't even athletes that are in charge. It's terrible. Yeah. And I went to the cocktail party and I introduced myself to Olin Castle. I said, you don't know me, but I remember watching you in a track meet in Connecticut. He was an Olympian, a 400-meter athlete. Someday I will be in charge of long distance running for the United States in this organization. 2 years later, I was co-chairman with Creigh Virgin. And then I became the overall chairman. Then Don Cardon took and I had to beat out Alan Steinfeld from the New York Roadrunner. He was the race director. Fred LeBeau was still the race director. And Fred spoke in behalf of Alan Steinfeld, and Don Cardon spoke on behalf of me. And I found out later I won by 1 vote. But I was just on the skyrocket of doing things on so many different fronts, volunteering and professional.
How well did you know Fred LeBeau?
Oh, really?
Really?
I mean, he was just the nicest. I can't begin to explain what an interesting, wonderful man. Did you ever meet him?
I did, in Cairo. I lived in Cairo for 15 years.
Oh my God, that's great.
And Fred came over with 4 non-elite runners, and he was paid by Marie Francis as a consultant on the first ever Hepset marathon. We ran around the Pyramid of Giza down to Saqqara, ran around Saqqara and came back.
That is
Marie Francis.
Oh my gosh.
So Marie Francis had just run the Miss Egypt Universe contest. The 5 finalists, bathing suit, judging was in a private hotel room because it couldn't be in public. She was beginning the exotic marathons, Great Wall, Kilimanjaro, pyramids. So Fred comes in with 4 runners And I had recovered from my injury after several years, and I was still an athlete. I was with the Hash House Harriers. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So the Hash was helping Marie get the logistics for the marathon set up. So we met with Fred and these runners, and I go early. I said, I can run a half. I'm sure I can
What year
jump in
was
and
this?
run 1991 or 1992.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, I'm sure I can run the half marathon. At the register, this little table about 6, 7 feet wide was Miss Egypt Universe signing people up. They're trickling in. And I said, I'm just going to run the half marathon. And she said, oh, run the marathon. I said, no,
Oh my
I'm
God.
not quite ready. But I looked over and she started to hand me a number. I said, well, what's that pile of numbers? It says 1. She goes, that's for the marathon. I said, so if I run the marathon, I can wear number 1? She said,
Oh my God.
absolutely. So I pinned on number 1. I got hit by a donkey. I had to
No,
go into someone's house
wait,
and
you got a donkey?
yes, on the trail. The water stops at 10K left when we went by, so they weren't there on the way back. So I wasn't prepared. I was pretty 3 days of walking down steps backwards after running a marathon without properly training. But the debriefing meeting with Brad, he basically said, "Don't do this again here."
Oh,
He it wasn't long after that trip that he got cancer himself.
yeah, it's very interesting. I met Fred at the Athletic Congress meeting. This was in the early 80s. I also met Alan Steinfeld. He was his protege. They're the leaders in the sport. Who was I? I'd gotten into the formal side of running in the fall of 78. For God's sake, this is 4 years later or something. I would bump into Fred periodically. First of all, he said, if you, and I think it was Marie that I would just call his office either to talk to him, but I would call her and say, can you send me 5 or 10 free entries? And she would always send them to me. Fred and I just became just good friends. And when I needed advice on something strategic, in distance running and far after I finished with I stayed on the committees and stuff, but I wasn't leadership. I'd say, Fred, what do you think about this? Nah, you don't want to do that. "Oh, yeah, you do that." And I remember going with a really interesting guy, Alvin Chris. I always said he was his consigliere. He was an attorney, but he was the one that did all the behind the scenes stuff for and some of it not quite legal for Olin. Alvin and I went to New York City to be with Fred when a gentleman from Los Angeles said he wanted to put on a marathon in Los Angeles. And we're sitting in the New York Athletic Club in this private room. And I'm there because I'm the chairman of long distance running, but I'm also representing athletes. So it's like a really interesting combination of stuff. There's Fred and Alan and Alvin, Chris, and me, Olin, are there. And this guy from LA, I've forgotten his name now, but he started the LA Marathon. And Fred said, tell you what, if you want to do a marathon in LA, I'll let you do it. I'll let you do it, but you have to do it in the spring. You can't do it in the fall because that's my territory. That's how these things were done back then. And I just admired Fred because he would be so strategic. The one thing he was very much, he was a ladies' man. And I would see him, let's say I saw him in Miami at a race. He'd tell me, because he'd be with somebody, I know you're going to New Orleans. Don't say anything about this woman because it'll be a different woman. And he was serious, and it would be.
Yeah.
For being at LA. My athlete, Ernest Jello, I think was second or third in the race. But Fred said, remember, don't say, no, and so he was always just he was just such a great influence. And he was one of the ones that I thought, if he can do this, makes something out of nothing, why can't I do that? I should be able to do things. And that's why I just pretend until it's real. But you're asking about Fred LeBeau. Right up till his passing, I would call him. I called him a lot. I just treasured that friendship. And Alan Steinfeld and I became dear friends for years. When I beat him to be the chair of long distance running, I made him my assistant chair. It was just how we did things back then. It was more civilized. Fred let me be the lead for two Mercedes. I was in charge of the women's Mercedes at New York for several years. I just got to do fun things that you just got to do fun things. It was amazing.
Yeah. It's fun, these almost crossing paths we've had in
I know it's
uh,
Tyro. That's crazy.
one other, the Sydney games in
Yes,
2000.
I did.
Yeah, I had a
There's
press pass.
oh, you did?
I am not a professional journalist, but I was in Cairo. I was writing for PC World Egypt because it was a little rag, and
Uh,
I made up a pen name, and I used to write a column for them, and I asked them to give me a letter to cover the Olympics. A buddy said, "Come down and dive with me. You can sleep on my hotel floor." My dad's got a hotel
oh my
room in
God.
Sydney. And I showed up at the airport. I pulled out this letter and said, "I'm here for a press pass." And the driver took us to the press center straight from the airport.
Isn't that amazing, that press center?
Yeah. I said, "I'm here for a press pass." And they start typing. This is easy. And they said, "Your name's not on the list." I said, "Oh, no, I just thought of this 2 weeks ago. We stopped issuing these passes a year ago." So I spent the day talking to the Egyptians saying, "I'm a tech guy. I want to write about the IBM data center that runs behind the scenes." That's what I did. But they
That's
gave me a
great.
pass, but that was a fun experience. Yeah.
For me, it was a great irony. For years, I did the radio broadcast for the Chicago Marathon. And back in the early days, Bob Bright asked me, I'd met him at a running camp, again, Lake Tahoe. Jeff Galloway at Squaw Valley put on a running camp. And I went for a couple of years in the late 70s. Bob Bright, good runner and a former Marine, actually decorated Marine. And I met him there for the first time. He was the race director of Chicago. And Bob and I became friends because, first of all, we had the military in common. He invited me to come and be on the radio broadcast at Chicago. And I went, whoa, this is crazy. This was in the 80s. And I loved doing it. I became well known with the ABC affiliate. So I did it for years and years. And in 1998, the guy that was in charge of that broadcast went to ABC Sports Radio at the headquarters in New York City. And I forgot about him. In the spring of 2000, I got a phone call. He said, I was given your name by Chris, this guy from that I had known back in Chicago. He said, you know everybody in the sport, and we are really looking for somebody that understands track and field and the marathon and so on to be our representative on air for the Olympics in Sydney. He said, can you give me some names? And I had learned to seize the moment. And I said, look no further. He goes, what do you mean? He said, it's me. I'll do it for you. He said, you would? I said, yeah, I'll do it. And he said, but you'll have to be gone for several weeks. I said, I'll do it. Never talked about money or anything. I said, I'm very familiar with track and field. I've been doing track and field coverage for the Big 10, the Big 8, Big 12. And I've been doing all this commentary on cable. And I said, so it's a very familiar territory for me. I'm an aficionado. I know all the names and so on. I said, and marathon, I got that cold. That's easy. And I'm training a woman on the U.S. triathlon team. I'm her coach for her distance running component for 10,000 meters. And he said, that's great. Okay, we'll send you a contract. And that was it. I hung up. I went, what just happened? I knew I'd reached the zenith. That was it. I was at the top of the heap. I loved every minute of it. I stayed in Australia for a month, but
Sydney was an amazing host city, the people.
oh my gosh, people had rented out their condos and things. And so I'm I was staying in a condo with a couple of producers and the guy covering some of the other sports and so on. And so basketball and who's still a commentator, I think, for the New York Nets. I just had a blast and I was totally in my environment. And I mean, there would be times where I was on the air live on ABC television early in the morning. We're going to Creigh, Kelley, give an update on track and field. Yeah, Creigh, tell us what's been going on. And I just blabber about it. I wish I had the tapes of that. I would get calls from friends around the country and emails back then because email was up and running. Friends say, I just saw you was featured on ABC this morning. So, and of course, ABC radio, I was on that all the time for 3 weeks. Anyway, it was a blast. I just have my credential with a lot of other credentials downstairs, framed up and stuff. And again, you seize the moment. And I can remember saying, this is it. Nothing will top this because ABC stopped covering the Olympics that way. NBC
Right.
took everything over. I
Yeah.
riding the wrong horse, but I rode it while it lasted. I was doing the radio broadcast for Chicago up until about 3 or 4 years ago, but
Yeah.
just lucky, just
Yeah.
lucky.
Well, I can relate. I certainly know that I would not have gotten a press pass
That's a great story.
after 9/11. What I bluffed my way through would not have
Crazy.
been
I want to tell you
possible.
about bluffing your way through. So at the Olympics, I did some crazy ass stuff. This was one of them. I asked ABC, I said, "Where's my press pass for the triathlon?" And I said, "It's the debut of the triathlon. It's not in my inventory of press passes." We overlooked it. I said, "I've got to cover it." So I took my USA uniform because I've also been the coach or team leader for several international teams during the 90s. And you're given virtually the same Olympic style uniform that they had. So it's USA's emblazoned all over it, American flags. And then I took every credential that I had. And I had some credentials from other races in the world that I'd been at recently. For some reason, were in this particular carry-on bag. I strung them all together, put them around my neck, took my radio flag, which had ABC on it, stuck it in my vest, my jacket, along with I was doing tape recordings, the cassette tapes, put that inside with my uniform. Got down there at, I think the event, you'd have to go back and look, but let's say that it started, I'll make this up, at 10 a.m. in the morning. I got down there at 8 o'clock and there's the opera house and there's nothing going on. There's just a couple of security guys. It's real quiet. And I walk up to the guy. I knew that over here to the right was where the swim start was. And I knew that's where the coaches and the athletes would be assembling. The trouble was I had no credential to go through that gate, but I saw there was a path around the exterior of the opera house. Where it's a long way, probably a half a mile, probably. And there's one security guy in a uniform cop thing. And I went up to him and I said, "You've kept everybody out." I used my whole military thing. He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Good, because this is a very tricky access point. We don't want anybody except officials going through here." I said, "I've been instructed to check on behalf of the Americans, the perimeter. I hope you don't mind, but I'll just be a little while." He said, "No, sir, that's fine. Go ahead." And I walk through. Now I walk all the way around. There's nothing. Sailboats, a few things floating around. I get back. Now there's a security guy with his back to me, but I'm literally 20 feet away from where the athletes are assembling. And I come up behind this guy. I saw he was a sergeant. I said, "Sergeant." He goes, "Sir?" I said, "I just checked the perimeter. Have you had anybody go through here?" He goes, "No, sir." I said, "When do you change shifts?" And he goes, "Probably in 30 minutes. But first, Chelsea Clinton has to come through, President Clinton's daughter." And I went, "All right, I'm going to hang here with you for a little bit. Then I've got to get back in with the coaches." And yeah, I looked the part. So Chelsea Clinton comes by and waves to us. And we wave. Then his lieutenant comes up. And by this time, I'd gone to the other side of the barrier and just talking to this guy. And I said, Lieutenant, this guy's been on time, in place, in charge. Great job. Just want to compliment your crew. And he said, thank you, sir. And I said, okay, see you later. I got to go in. So I went in. Now I'm in with all the coaches and all the athletes. And I pull out my flag, ABC, and I start interviewing people. I was the only media person in
Oh
there.
my god, that's great.
And I wish I still had that tape. So I'm interviewing everybody, American athletes and this and that, getting them all on tape. And a coach from either Australia or Great Britain comes up to me and says, I didn't know you were going to be here, Creigh. Are you coaching the team? They'd see me as a coach or team leader at some other event. I said, no, I said, I'm one of my athletes. I've been coaching her in the 10,000. And he said, let's go out and get a cup of coffee and then we'll come back in and watch the start. I said, no, I'm good right here. Good right here. And he said, nah, come on. At this point, people are starting to notice me and I put my flag away and I go out and he said, let's go back in. I said, I'll be there in a moment because I knew I had no way to get back in. It was done. And so I go out and I'm pissed. But I see an entourage coming forward, and it was the governor of the Sydney area. I don't remember the province or whatever they called it. The township was a big area, but it's the governor. I pull out my flag because it was his overall responsibility for the Olympic venue in terms of politics. It wasn't the mayor, it was him. The guys say, hey, wait, you can't talk to him. And I said, that's interesting, Governor. You don't want to talk to the American press about the debut of the triathlon in your country. I understand. And he goes, let that man through. Good politician. So I got this interview, an exclusive interview with him about that. I said, thank you very much. And at that point, I was done. And I called up my guys. I said, I got interviews. How'd you get in? I said, it's a story for another time. But I also got an interview with the governor. They wanted that. And so we had all this body of work before the event even started. And anyway, it was just talk about pre 9/11. You can't make it up. I did it.
No.
I
Yeah.
did it. Just like you did it.
The farcical thing that happened with me, Marianne Jones was long jumping,
Oh, I interviewed her.
right?
Yeah.
During the qualifying, it's on the far side of the track,
Yep.
the runway. So I said, I got to go over there. And all I had with me was my underwater wind up camera
Oh
from,
my
I'd
gosh.
just been diving on the Great Barrier Reef for a couple weeks. So I came in and I get into there and it's packed with the photographers because the main media is at the finish line.
Right.
And I go to these guys, I said, hey, I had a photographer's vest on. And I said, I just want to get a couple pictures of Marion during the prelims. Is that all right? And so the press corps, they know each other. They don't know who I am. They're like, let this guy through. They let me down to the rail and
Unbelievable.
I pull out this little wind up camera. I snapped my picture, said, thanks guys. They looked at me with their 7 pounds each,
Yeah. Well,
filters and extensions on, and they just start going,
yeah. That's great.
so we should carry that. And I said, I won't be back. Thank you. And I got out of there.
That was just the best. Look, you get one life to live, and you better live it as large as you can. You don't want to do any harm. Do no harm. There have been some tight squeezes I've been in, which I will not discuss. Which I came out okay, but oh my God, my life would have changed immeasurably in a negative way had those things turn out a different way. But I can usually talk my way out of almost anything. But Sydney was remarkable. I interviewed her afterwards. I interviewed so many different people. I had to, as part of my job. I crashed a few parties that were awesome. Credentials would get you almost anywhere.
I got the Australian bronze medal field hockey around my neck at their party.
Oh my God. Really?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
great.
they didn't expect to get a medal, so they have a party. I don't know how we got in. Got me and my buddy into that party, and yeah, I just said, "What? Look, I'm gonna look the number in your chest. Can I wear your medal?" He said, "Yeah, just find me later."
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That is great. You know what? I think the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s were just the best 3 decades ever. The 90s were much more troubling as you got later on, just how dysfunctional the governing bodies were. It's just a tragedy. I actually had a meeting, I think it was in Reno, Nevada, at the USA Track and Field Convention, and I had negotiated that Roadrunners Clubs of America, RRCA, USA Track and Field, Running USA, which I was a founding member of, would all get together in one room. I said, I have this grand idea, but I think instead of you fighting amongst yourselves, we could be bigger than that. And I came up with this strategy of an overarching model that they would all be a part of. They would keep their identities, but sponsors could come in and buy long distance running. If they wanted youth athletics, that would be proportionally to RRCA. If it was track and field, it would probably go to USA Track and Field. If it was pure road running, but so AT&T could come in and they pay $1 million and they get the money spread in these various ways. They just were, they didn't have the vision. And if had they done that, I can venture to say, Seb Coe now sees it with World Athletics, how he's and broadened the bubble. Certainly Formula One did it. There's a lot of things we could learn from those models, but we fail all the time in long distance running because we're too parochial in our interest. In my opinion, that's just my opinion. But man, those were fun times. I tell people all the time, I'm sure you say the same thing. You know, the times that I was running that were, as far as I was concerned, marginal times as a recreation athlete would win 95% of all the road races in America today that don't have prize money. They would win them outright. Just crazy, insane. And it just stuns me that, but on the other side of the coin, in the early 80s, we brought women into the sport. That grew the bubble. We brought race walking and then walking into the sport. That grew the bubble. We brought charities into the sport. That grew the bubble. All of us that have been nurtured and made careers in the sport have done it because of those added texture to the sport. And people say, I can't believe you gave women only a few awards and the men most of them because there weren't that many women running, but you didn't let them run. So why would they want to? And so I said, I don't own that. I said, because we were the tip of the spear that said that we will include. And, and we did. Most of those major changes happened under our watch as younger leaders. And I'm forever grateful because we were able to do that. The downside is there's not the interest in the tip of the spear anymore, at least in our country. When I go to Kenya every year since 2003, and there was another funny anecdotal thing. I only went there because I figured that pixie dust would rub off on me and I'd get faster again. That didn't happen, but I fell in love with the country. And my good friend, Peter Tanui, I introduce him as my brother to everybody. He was a very good collegiate runner, 18-time NAIA All-American. And he got good, but he never got great, like a 104 half marathoner. We became dear friends and have been ever since. I went over and he was my minder and I got a chance to see and meet all these great people. Ibrahim Hussein was one of them who's still deeply involved in their athletics. I met extraordinary people in very ordinary places, very rural, very agrarian, very not rich. But because he made me go to see his primary school, where he was the first kid to graduate from this primary school who went on to an American college and graduated. So he's a big deal there. Now, there have been others that have since, but there's 400 or 500 kids in this very rural school. I go and the kids are just fascinated to see this Mzungu white guy and come up and touch you and run away and so on. And it was a fascinating experience. As the headmaster was showing me around, I saw something that looked like a little roughed out garden. I said, is that your garden? He said, no, someday God will give us a library. I said, where's your library? And it was like a little of old British books. It was tragic to see. And we walked on and I saw these women around a fire. And I said, "Is that where they burn the garbage?" And he said, "No, they're cooking the children's ugali for lunch." And I turned to this is when you go, maybe I was a ready fire aim, not a ready aim fire. I said, "Peter, we should just start a nonprofit foundation and build a library and a kitchen." Suddenly, Mr. Kelley is going to build a library and a kitchen. I felt morally obligated. So I came back to America. We had formed our 501(c)(3), and we certainly built a library and a kitchen. We have no staff. We just have a bank account where we raise money at these parties, and then we build stuff. And we've been doing it for 20 years. And it's wonderful. And that's why I'm going back there. That's why we're going to go back there and get married, because it's the village. I know everybody. The person that insisted that we had to get married there in June of 2021, I went back and there's Paris Chepticher and her husband, Davis Gano, and go to the same little church, this rural church that Peter and his family go to, that I go to whenever I'm there. And we became friends because he and Peter, her husband and Peter, are very good friends. So they insisted I come to lunch. And when she set the world record, we had to be guests at this big party at their place when she came home. And it was almost embarrassing. They want you to speak. My God, what am I doing speaking here? They have the governor speaking and the village chief and everybody else, not me, but I had to speak. And then later, I was going to lunch with them after church in June of 21. No, two. So Paris and Davis say, "You're going to get married. You're going to get married here." I said, "No, I can't. No, no, you must get married here. And we're going to be in charge of your wedding," kind of thing. I came back and told Renee, because she wasn't with me, "How about we get married in Kenya? It won't cost us anything other than the trip that we always go on." And she said, "Sure. Hereby you're invited. You have to pay your own way, take care of your own expenses, but you're invited." And how did I know that Paris was going to win? That may have been, I don't know if it must have been June 2021. And maybe that's when it was. Anyway, Paris went on to win the Olympics, New York, and then Boston. That's the biggest trifecta I've ever seen. And she's going to be running New York. I hope she does well. But anyway, the point is, I meet these people in a human experience, not in a running experience. I've never been at a race with Paris, but I've been to her house 8 times as their guest. So it's just circumstance and it's wonderful. When I went there in 2010, maybe, there's what they call a Discovery Half Marathon. And the Discovery Half Marathon is in Eldoret, not far from Capsabet, where we are. All these runners come to be discovered. The slowest time is probably 105. This is at altitude. So I'm just a spectator. Here comes this entourage of Mercedes and things, and all these officials are getting out. And there's Paul, great marathoner. Anyway, they're all coming up. So he says hi to me, but I'm on the side of the fence and he's over there. And then this guy walks up and it's Ibrahim Hussein, but he's big. I didn't recognize it. "You don't recognize me, Creigh." Everybody stops. When he stops, I mean, he's in charge of athletics. And I said, "Ibrahim?" And he goes, "Yeah." He said, "You must come into the VIP area." I said, "I'm back here and I'm with Peter. He can come too." So we walk over and they won't let Peter in. And I said, "I'm not going in, but I'm Ibrahim's guest." And Ibrahim says, "Let him through." The end of that. So we go in and we sit down and there's Rono. Henry Rono's this iconic guy. And I'm a guest. The race hadn't started yet. And Ibrahim says, "I want to introduce you to all these people." And the head of athletics, all of athletics is there for Kenya. Ibrahim's there, others are there, and Henry Rono, a guest of honor. Henry and I had met under less than perfect conditions. I was an agent. I still had my running store in the early 80s. Henry had been a guest of somebody and came to the store. and he had not been behaving well in his life. Let me just put it that way. And he said, I want you to be my agent. And I knew what he had been doing with his life. And I said, I respectfully decline, but I am in great admiration of you. And we remained friends, albeit I turned him down. Here we are many years later. And Ibrahim switches into Swahili to tell everybody, not Kalenjin, although that was his tribal language, and tells everybody the story. Now they're all looking at me. I have no clue. And at the end, they all turned and did a round of applause for me. I have no idea what's going on. I turned to Peter and I said, what happened? He said, Abraham told a story that in 1980, let's make this up, 87, he wanted to run a race in Australia, but they didn't think he was worthy of going. And his agent wouldn't try to get him into the race. So he called you because he knew you were an agent and knew people. I'm sorry, maybe New Zealand, and you knew people. But it might have been Australia. Anyway, because I knew Rob DiCostello was one of my roommates at the wheeling distance class, road race
Ah,
years before. And so whomever I called Australia, long distance call. And he said, and you got him into the race. He won the race and he wanted to give you 10%. And you turned it down because you weren't his agent. You said it would be unethical for me to take the money, but I'm glad you won. He said, then I see Creigh at the Boston Marathon, and I think he won there twice. And this was the second time when I was invited athlete kind of thing. And I'm in the church, and Ibrahim comes up to me and said, I need good luck today. Will you pin my number on? I went, sure. And so he said, and I won the race, and he pinned my number on, and that was good luck. He told the story, and the point was white people historically had just taken advantage and taken money from the African athletes. But I was the total antithesis of that. I was just their friend. And Peter said, you'll never want for anything in this country anymore. So whenever I needed a favor for something, I got it. Amazing stuff like that. And I try to do good. That's what I always say. And you tell me how many distance runners that are bad people. I'm talking about at all levels, bad people.
yeah,
I can name almost none. I can name
yeah,
a couple, but almost none. And we self-select as whenever I go to a gathering or a party, I gravitate naturally to distance runners of all ages, speeds, talent, everything. This afternoon, I'm going to Peter Tanui's daughter's. They have a middle school. She's in seventh grade. They have a track meet. And is it middle school? I think it is. I don't know what she's running, maybe the mile. I don't know whatever she's running, but I'm going to their track meet. I love those people. I love that camaraderie. They don't know who I am. They could care less. I'm just a spectator. And I thrive in that environment. I hazard to say anybody you've ever talked to on this podcast feels exactly the same way,
yeah.
precisely the same way.
Yeah, I think you've done a good job of explaining it and bringing it out from your essence. It's very cool. And I think, yeah, everybody's going to relate to that.
No, I'm still announcing probably 50% less than I was. I do think that we get aged out, and I think we're smart to age ourselves out before we get aged out. And I still do the ones that I really like doing, like Quad Cities. It's a great marathon, great event. Joe Marino, great race director, some of those rock solid people. And I told almost now 2 years ago, I told the CEO of the Denver Colfax Marathon weekend, which I helped create back in 2004. And we had our first race in 2006. I said, 2024, I'm closing the door on being the race director. She said, no, you can hang on, be a consultant. I said, no, you could announce. I said, I don't want to. I just, no. And maybe I'll change my mind about the announcing, but right now it's time for younger people to come forward. And I said, that's extremely important for our sport to be nurtured. Don't keep these people from growing into the sport. Let them make our mistakes. Let them learn. Let them make it even better than it was. It doesn't mean I'm going to stop running. I'll probably run more. It doesn't mean I won't. Somebody calls up as a young race director and said, "How do you manage this? How should you do this?" I've, I have people that will say, "He was my mentor. He got me, helped me get started." And I won't tell you these people's name. They're incredibly successful today. I had no part in that, although they insist I was a mentor. I don't remember any of that. I just share information. I think it's important. We need to nurture the sport, keep it healthy, keep it going forward, strong.
You certainly know that you've made the contribution. I think over time, the many contributions and the legacy contributions will just multiply. Next time, we'll be back with part 4 of 4 with Creigh Kelley. I hope you enjoyed listening to interviews with Creigh as much as I did speaking with him. I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.